before television cameras captured a single boundary, before stadiums roared with tens of thousands of voices, before cricket became a global spectacle broadcast across continents, there was one man standing at a crease in Victorian England, single-handedly rewriting the rules of an entire sport. His name was William Gilbert Grace. History remembers him simply as WG. He wasn't just a cricketer. He was a phenomenon, a celebrity, a physician, a showman, and, depending on who you ask, a shameless rule-bender. Yet without him, the game we recognize today might never have existed. This is the story of the man who invented modern cricket. Gloucestershire, England, 1848. In the quiet village of Downend, near Bristol, a boy was born into a household already obsessed with bat and ball. His father, Henry Mills Grace, was a country doctor with a fierce passion for cricket. His mother, Martha, reportedly understood the sport better than most men of her era and pushed her sons toward greatness with unusual determination. Young William grew up surrounded by siblings who would themselves become accomplished players. The family constructed a makeshift pitch in their own orchard, and matches against local clubs became a regular ritual. It was here, among apple trees and rough grass, that the foundations of a legend were quietly laid. By the age of 9, Grace was already competing against grown men. By 16 he was scoring centuries that stunned seasoned observers. Something extraordinary was clearly brewing in that small Gloucestershire orchard. Cutaway, illustration of a 19th-century village cricket ground, wooden fences, spectators in top hats. Narrator VO. Cricket in the mid-1800s bore little resemblance to the disciplined, tactical sport of today. Pitches were uneven, protective gear was minimal, and technique varied wildly from player to player. Batsmen often swung wildly, hoping for luck rather than precision. Grace would change that entirely. What set Grace apart wasn't merely talent, it was innovation. Prior to his emergence, batting philosophy split players into two camps, those who defended cautiously and those who attacked recklessly. Grace fused both approaches into something unprecedented. He developed a technique combining watchful defense with calculated aggression, adapting his method depending on the bowler, the pitch, and the situation. Historians now consider this the birth of modern batting theory, reading conditions, adjusting shot selection, and constructing an innings methodically rather than relying purely on instinct. Contemporary accounts describe spectators traveling for hours, sometimes overnight, just to witness him bat. Newspapers dedicated entire columns to his innings. Crowds swelled into the tens of thousands at grounds that had never seen such numbers before his arrival. In 1871 alone, Grace accumulated over 2,700 runs in a single first-class season, a tally so far beyond his contemporaries that rival captains reportedly altered entire field placements just to contain him. No batsman before him had dominated an era with such statistical supremacy. Remarkably, cricket was never officially his profession. Grace trained and qualified as a physician, earning his medical degree while simultaneously establishing himself as the most feared batsman in England. He would often arrive at matches directly from treating patients, then walk out to bat as though switching effortlessly between two demanding careers. This dual identity fascinated the Victorian public. Here was a man of science and intellect, yet also a fierce competitor capable of overwhelming brute-force bowling attacks. The combination elevated him beyond athlete status into something closer to a folk hero. Grace practiced medicine for decades, serving rural communities around Bristol. Patients occasionally waited while he finished a match, an arrangement almost unimaginable by today's professional standards. Yet somehow he balanced both callings without diminishing either. Grace's influence extended far beyond his personal statistics. He effectively transformed cricket into organized entertainment. Matches featuring him became commercial events, drawing paying crowds that funded stadium improvements, transportation infrastructure, and the professionalization of county cricket itself. Clubs recognized his box office power and scheduled fixtures specifically around his availability. Promoters understood that his presence alone could multiply attendance. In many ways, Grace pioneered the concept of the sporting superstar decades before that phrase existed. He also championed longer, more strategic formats over shorter contests, believing extended matches better tested skill and endurance. His preference shaped how first-class cricket structured itself for generations afterward. Beyond format, Grace influenced captaincy philosophy as well. He emphasized tactical field placements, studying opposition weaknesses, and adapting strategy mid-match rather than relying on rigid, predetermined plans. Many consider these principles the earliest blueprint for what we now call cricket analytics. No legend exists without controversy, and Grace was far from a flawless figure. Critics accused him of bending rules whenever convenient, exploiting ambiguous regulations, and occasionally intimidating umpires through sheer force of reputation. Historic fixtures. Sibling rivalry blended with mutual pride, producing some of the era's most compelling family narratives within competitive sport. Tragedy touched this story too. Fred Grace died young shortly after representing his country, casting a somber shadow over an otherwise triumphant family legacy. Reports suggest WG carried this loss quietly for years, channeling grief into continued dedication toward the sport they had shared since childhood. Despite personal hardship, Grace rarely allowed setbacks to diminish his public performances. Audiences came expecting brilliance, and he consistently delivered, regardless of circumstances weighing privately upon him. Every sporting icon who followed, from Don Bradman decades later to modern superstars filling stadiums across continents, inherited a template Grace essentially authored. Statistical dominance combined with commercial appeal, technical mastery paired with magnetic personality. This formula didn't exist as recognized concept until Grace demonstrated its power. Cricket boards eventually formalized structures around scheduling, ticketing, and player compensation, partly because Grace's popularity proved such systems were commercially viable. Without demonstrable public demand, administrators might have delayed professionalizing the sport for additional decades. Today's broadcast deals, sponsorship contracts, and global tournaments trace conceptual roots back to a bearded doctor who understood, perhaps instinctively, that sport could function simultaneously as competition and spectacle. It's worth pausing to ask why, in an age saturated with instant highlights and modern statistical marvels, a Victorian-era doctor still commands attention from documentary makers, historians, and casual fans alike. The answer lies partly in timing. Grace emerged precisely when cricket stood at a crossroads, poised between disorganized regional pastime and structured national institution. His talent alone might have earned him admiration. His timing turned him into a catalyst for transformation. Consider also the sheer improbability of his story. A rural physician, tending to patients across Gloucestershire's countryside, simultaneously terrorizing bowling attacks across the nation's finest grounds. Few narratives blend intellectual profession and athletic dominance so seamlessly. That duality alone guarantees his relevance whenever conversations turn toward cricket's origins. Modern commentators frequently invoke his name when praising batsmen who combine patience with aggression, or captains who adapt tactics fluidly mid-match. Whether consciously acknowledged or not, his fingerprints remain embedded within cricket's vocabulary, its coaching manuals, and its competitive philosophy. Perhaps most importantly, his journey reminds audiences that institutions rarely transform through committees or gradual policy shifts alone. Occasionally, transformation requires one extraordinary individual, compelling enough to force an entire sport to reorganize itself around his brilliance. Cricket found that individual in a bearded Gloucestershire doctor who simply refused to be ordinary. Consider this. Over a century after his passing, historians, broadcasters, and enthusiasts continue examining his career, still uncovering fresh perspectives on his methods and impact. Few athletes from any era generate such enduring fascination. W.G. Grace remains proof that true greatness extends beyond personal achievement. It reshapes institutions, inspires successive generations, and permanently alters how an entire sport organizes itself. Cricket, as recognized globally today, its formats, its strategies, its commercial infrastructure, carries fingerprints belonging unmistakably to him. This has been Primetime Sports. If uncovering the origins of modern cricket captured your curiosity, subscribe for additional untold stories pulled directly from sporting history. Roughly 16 to 18 minutes at standard narration pacing, allowing for pauses, visual cutaways, and archival footage inserts. Maintain a measured, authoritative documentary voice throughout. Think steady gravitas rather than hyped sports highlight energy. Reserve slightly quicker pacing for statistical reveals and slower, more reflective delivery for personal or emotional segments, such as the family tragedy chapter. Prioritize period-accurate illustrations, sepia photography, and subtle parallax animation on static images to maintain viewer engagement during longer narration stretches. Where genuine archival photographs are unavailable, commissioned illustrations styled after Victorian newspaper engravings will preserve authenticity. Open with restrained orchestral strings building gradually beneath the cold open. Introduce lighter, curious instrumentation during childhood and early career segments. Shift toward triumphant, sweeping arrangements during peak career achievements, then soften again for the closing reflection, mirroring the emotional arc of the narration itself. Since the target audience includes casual American viewers less familiar with cricket terminology, consider brief on-screen definitions for terms like first-class cricket, wickets, and boundary, appearing subtly without interrupting narration flow.